Hey guys, Kansas City Kings, Nate, Tiny Archibald. Part 3 on my romantic setting jazz music. Again, there's so many choices you can pull out here, and a lot of it's seasoned to your own taste. But I'm trying to show you stuff that I can guarantee you won't drive away Mr. Wrong, Mr. Right. You know, it's smooth setting, color music that's going to feel good for even someone who doesn't know this music. And for the most part, what I showed you on episode 1 was the vocal stuff. And one sec. The vocal stuff is probably the safest stuff because they're used to vocal pop stuff. There's a format there with verse, chorus that keeps them comfortable and familiar. Secondly, I'm with piano trios and guitar stuff because there's no bright horns that are going to hurt people. And horns can be very abrasive when you're having a conversation. A lot of horns come in at the same audio levels as voices, you know. So you can be having a conversation with the bass, piano, and the drums and hear each other just fine. All of a sudden that tenor or that alto comes in, or that trumpet, and it's taking up the same wavelengths as human voices are. And it can really make a conversation much more difficult. And a lot of times when I'm at the club playing jazz music for people, I'll shy away from the real horn heavy stuff. And I'm on my mixer knobs knowing that, okay, here comes the sax. Let's crank those mids and highs down a little bit so that that's not going to come off so bright to make everyone's ears wince, you know. So that being said, what horn players can we play on a dinner date? The candles are lit, the lights are low. We want that music to feel right. And sax feels like it should be something that should be part of all this conversation, but I would say 80% of it's not. You know what I mean? The Jackie McLeans, the Lee Morgans, a lot of that stuff is not really date music. It's great, it's outstanding for what it is, but it's not really romantic setting music. And a lot of the cats I'm going to show you are going from the swing era because they came up in that blues, that pop, that R&B, that swing music had a sensuality to it at all times. And the sexuality of the blues, the sexuality of jazz is something the avant-garde strips away from it. So the more out there, the more avant-garde jazz got, the less sexual it became, and its appeal went with it. Because for the most part, as humans, we are interested in sex and love, and it's the greatest form of happiness is sex and love. And when we're denied those things, it opens up cans of worms psychologically for all of us, and it's hard to get around. So jazz and sex, jazz and love were synonymous for decades. And so when I'm getting to the horn players here, we're going to really touch on some of those guys. First and foremost, Dexter Gordon. He's an all-star when it comes to playing romantic ballads. I'm going to show you this one here, one of the great album covers of all time on the Dutone label. A tough thing to find from the West Coast, the classic Smoking Picture. It's got Carl Perkins on the sax. This guy's sound is sex. It's just this round, warm embrace that washes over you. This is what we're playing right now. And I drove around in a car last week listening to this album, and I guess I'll hang my tears up to dry, which is what we're listening to. Must have been on repeat for an hour and a half. That's love-making jazz right there. Perfect. It's perfect. And every time he puts that sax to his lips, he's kissing a lady. He's talking about those fine curves. He's talking about those hills and valleys of that feminine physique. He's got a spiritual nature to him, but he's also very sexual, very sensual in his playing. Long, tall, drink of water, Dexter Gordon was. And I don't think there's any question he was quite the ladies' man. Even his blue notes here, which was kind of his resurgence in the 60s, he's still that big, full, sweet-toned Coleman Hawkins era player. And I'm going to show you a few other things here by Dexter. Every one of these Blue Note records here has a couple ballads on there. Willow Weep for Me, Stairway to the Stars, Our Man in Paris. Yup. You put these on a little Spotify search. Who can I turn to? Everybody's Somebody's Fool? Yup. Even on this one, which has the great Tanya on side 1, which is a little bit more up tempo and a little bit more grooving. Even this record on side 2 has the absolutely beautiful Darn That Dream. And so Dexter Gordon is someone that you can put on. It's going to have that next level of heft to it, but it's not going to drive her away. It's not going to drive him away if you're a jazz gal. Another guy, Sonny Chris, comes from the bebop era. By the mid-50s, he was making these beautiful, sensual jazz. It's not really hard bop. It's not bebop anymore. It's more modern, cool bop. It's cool. It's beautiful. Beautiful, small group versions of great love songs. Sonny Chris, you can't go wrong. On the trumpet, Sweets Edison. This guy was a great player for decades. He's on a lot of the great pop jazz songs from the 50s and 60s and 40s. His records as a leader on Verve are outstanding. Just a real, sincere emoter. And the guys from this era are emoting more about love than they are about civil rights. They're emoting more about happiness and joy because they came from a much tougher background than the guys from the 50s and 60s, you know? And this came out probably in the mid-50s, but he's an older fella here, just like Dexter, just like a couple of other cats I'm going to show you, Coleman, Hawkins. These cats are older and wiser, and love is really what's on their mind, and they emote from such a place of joy, peace, and love. You can't go wrong putting on Sweets. Same vein, Ben Webster. Wow, what a player. You put this on, the gal's not gonna shriek, she's not gonna, you know, she's gonna be like, okay, I'm feeling this, what is this? I like it. Coleman Hawkins, incredible legacy, probably the true innovator of the saxophone. It was kind of a blurting marching instrument up until Coleman Hawkins, going back to Fletcher Henderson's groups in the 30s. He does a lot of great small group recordings in the 50s, whether on Riverside, whether on Prestige, on Impulse, with Coltrane, and with, let me write a blank here. But man, you cannot go wrong with Coleman Hawkins. But this one especially, At Ease with Coleman Hawkins. It was part of the Moodsville series on Prestige, and he's playing At Dawn on this record. At Dawning, man. While We're Young, Mighty Like a Rose. This record from front to back, it's going to put her in the mood. I promise you that. Seal of approval. I've tried that one a number of times. Clifford Brown, the greatest instrumentalist to ever walk this planet, as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to do an episode on him in the near future. Boy, no one enunciates and plays the trumpet like him. And you see that thing with strings and it can scare some people away. This is a beautiful, beautiful record. He's still fierce within every rounded, melodic, perfectly placed note. Doesn't matter the tempo. It can be 100 miles an hour. It can be 25. Very few cats play both well. This cat enunciates perfectly, melodically, on every tempo and in every setting. There's so much fire in him, but it's a controlled fire. You know, Lee Morgan's kind of bursting at the seams, trying to express. Clifford has it under control. He was a kind of a guy ahead of his time. I wish I could have heard him in a little bit later into the 50s and 60s to see where he would have gone. But we'll talk about that more in that episode. And the Clifford Brown Max Roach stuff is priceless. But this record with strings, that's dinner date stuff. Chet Baker, one of the true great romantic players. It's possible that the love he was singing about might have been for the needle at times, and maybe enhanced by that needle at times, but that's okay. We won't hold that against him. I promise you this: if you put on a Chet Baker record, she will not want to go take her dog out. And if you start any evening off with Alone Together, you won't be alone for long. It can be chilly in that apartment, but you put on Alone Together, and that silky mist will envelop you, and that movie's going to get a little bit more intimate, and that blanket's going to get a little tighter around the two of you, and next thing you know, that embrace. Alone Together is one of my all-time favorite songs on this album by this version. I love Chet, but the addition of Pepper Adams in here on the baritone saxophone, man, that baritone sax, when it's emoted from a romantic place, that's a man saying I love you. That's beautiful stuff, priceless. I had to include Miles Davis, but Miles Davis is a guy that a lot of his records are mixed tempos. I didn't want to put a record there that had a bunch of Coltrane shrieking for a dinner date, and I didn't want to put the Gil Evans stuff in there. I have my reasons on that. His earlier Prestige stuff, it's a little bit inconsistent, and Miles is the greatest player of the muted trumpet ever. And of course, once Miles gets into the shorter groups and then into the fusion stuff, that's not dinner date stuff at all. And if you're having dinner date to Sorcerer or On the Corner, that's an interesting date. But I chose this for Miles Davis, and arguably people say this could be a Miles Davis record, even though it's billed to Cannonball Adderley. It's a Blue Note session, and Miles wasn't under contract with Blue Note, so it was billed as Cannonball's Something Else record. But Hank Jones, Sam Jones, Art Blakey, this record is one of the great records of all time in jazz. And the version of Autumn Leaves on here, you put that on, you're starting your own little romantic movie with that. And Hank Jones' piano at the end of that is to die for. This is a little twofer here on a guy that's not well known enough, Ike Quebec. And there's 6-7 records by him on the Blue Note label, another A&R guy for the label. This will be a little bit more straightforward, the blues. And this one's going to be a little bit more, this beautiful Boston Little with Kenny Burrell. This is date music. It's wonderful date music. I'd be missed not to bring this record up for this. Coltrane with Johnny Hartman. Coltrane, he's a tough person to put on for a beginner. You could put on ballads, you could put on Ellington with Coltrane, of course, but Coltrane also had so much on his mind. And Coltrane was a great spiritual seeker. I believe there was a lot of political, cultural, social intrigue in what he's always seeking for. You don't feel like love romantically was on his mind very often. You know, he's got love of self, he's got love of the great spirits, you know, the consciousness, the love supreme. But love supreme to me is not at all about romantic sex and love. That's not what he's talking about. This record with Johnny Hartman, though, finds Coltrane thinking about sex. Thank God. You know, if you're not thinking about sex, you're lying. But no, Hartman is beautiful. He's one of the great jazz singers that most people don't know about until they get this record. This is, I would guess, 90% of the people who know Johnny Hartman's introduction to him. The version of Lush Life on here, forget about it. That's as good as sax gets. And of course, Lush Life is the great song by Ellington's sidekick, whose name slips my mind right now because I'm trying to think of it. Billy Strayhorn. Lush Life's such a gorgeous song. Of course, Coltrane does it earlier on Prestige, like 58, on the album Lush Life. But the version on here supersedes that one by 10 times. And the baritone voice of Hartman, I want to say crooning, but he's got such a beautiful, graceful slide to his romantic settings that you'll soak up that record real quick. And then two last things I want to show you here. Lucky Thompson, he's another guy in that mid-era between the swing era and the hard bop era. So he fits in with that Dexter Gordon, Ben Webster, that whole era. He doesn't have a lot of stuff here in America as a leader. He's done a couple of great mild sessions, like the Hawkins session. He's got a couple sides on ABC that are solid. But this Dawn label record is beautiful, beautiful stuff. He spent a lot of time in Europe. So that's Lucky Thompson's a guy you could probably put on Pandora and be pretty satisfied with what tempo and mood is being set. And lastly, I want to make a little shout out to the West Coast. There's a lot of great stuff on the West Coast that's fairly inducive to romance. But the version on here of Summertime, you probably want it to be a little bit warmer than it is here today in Minnesota. But you put on that Summertime and you listen to these great players fill in those gaps and those moves and those. It's such a great melody, first of all. Summertime and the living is easy. But man, that's romantic stuff. So again, that's just a scratch of the surface. There's so much accessible, melodic, beautiful jazz that is full of sensuality and spirituality and sexuality that's going to embrace someone who doesn't even know it. And that's ultimately the measuring stick of something that's embraceable, is can you dig it the first time you hear it? Because almost anybody can get used to any sound. You can go to a factory hearing sound screech and machine bang and crash and all these sounds and not even hear that and get used to that within a few weeks. So we adapt to sounds and they become normal and comfortable to us. But when you hear something the first time, and that's good. Anybody says the first time they put on Ascension by Coltrane, so they loved it the first time, I think they're full of shit. It's just like somebody who says, all I like is super spicy food or super hoppy beer. You are on some level posing to make people see you a certain way. And you might like it, you might love it, that's fine. But to say that's all you like is super spicy food all the time, super avant-garde jazz is all you like, it takes some listening to get used to it. You don't start off drinking huge Cabernets. You work your way to that. And it takes some time to get that Cabernet fill your mouth and it be a joyous experience. And a supple Bordeaux trickles down the back of your mouth with that rich earthiness. That's an advanced palate. And this is love-making music we're talking about. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. I appreciate y'all for checking this out. Y'all have a great weekend. My name is Dan. Subscribe. Peace.